So today we're going to talk about audacious or being audacious versus incremental. And it is literally for me, the key of this whole thing, as Jim would describe it in his heart chart of storytelling, to me, this is the top of the mountain. This is as good as it gets. This is where it is that we get to play really big. We ended with a quote yesterday from the CEO of IKEA about the ability to enable or improve the lives for 1 billion people. That's also the mission for Singularity University. And what's really stunning about that claim is that it's not just a big organization that can go do that now, or someone who's been, around for 100 years who can do that now. Literally, almost any one of us will have the ability at some point to be able to impact a significant number of people. Maybe it's not 1 billion, but maybe it's more than 1 billion. When Mark Zuckerberg started Facebook, and I'm not sure he thought about how big this was all going to be necessarily. So with that, certainly comes responsibility that we do it in a way that improves the lives of people as opposed to in any way adds more stress or more constraint or more insecurity around that, which is why I think this book has really been building up to this moment, right? It's talking about why the playbook is dead. It was hopefully like building capacities for us to be able to get here, learning how to navigate more confidently, knowing how to build ecosystems of support and learning and partnerships for innovation, so we don't feel like we're doing all this alone. So these have been steps that we've been building to get to this moment, because to me, this is the really exciting one. And when you get into the book and you get to see the stories and the case studies of the people who have taken on this challenge, we start to see what it really means to play big in my vernacular of it, right? It's not about scale, and it's not about how we can grow as the most revenue in the shortest amount of time and become a unicorn. It really is about how we use and steward the resources that we have to greatest effect. And what we have learned also, I think, in this is this compass, right? We have those two questions. What does the future need and expect of us? And then what are you unique position to create and contribute to that? But the question becomes, where do we guide the compass? Like, how do we know where to go? And it's through this concept we call North Star. Singularity University will call it a massively transformative purpose. Stephen Kotler talked about purpose as being the thing both individually and organizationally that gives folks both the direction and I would say the courage to get over that liminal gap that we describe between what is here and what is coming next. All the brands that sort of didn't make it through were often just so stuck on transactional thinking and an ROI thinking and an incremental thinking that they weren't able to imagine what it could look like to be on the other side. And the ones that have, like Netflix, or we can talk about Dick's Sporting Goods in a moment, or we can talk about CVS. We can talk about some of these organizations that are doing well. Even Best Buy, which is sort of came out of that abyss and then figured out how to get to the other side, have been motivated by something much bigger than just that transaction and recognize that they have a unique position into what they can create and contribute to this future. And when we think about being audacious, it often is this opportunity to think much more systemically. It's not just about, again, how we can make our own organizations that much more efficient, but how we are playing as a member of society. That's the really big, again, invitation here. And again, I will continue to say the responsibility that we have. So one of the stories that we talk about in the book is Dick's Sporting Goods, that when there was nth number of mass shootings that had happened, I think this may have been the one after Las Vegas, they decided to pull guns from their stores, hunting rifles from their stores. And there was this big, huge uproar. 60-something people quit the company. There was all this pushback against it, but they just felt like, in urban stores, there was no reason to be selling hunting rifles. It just didn't make any sense anymore. And not only did they just take them out of the store, but the CEO had them melted down so that no one would be able to get to those guns again, which was an extraordinary commitment to this gesture. It wasn't just he felt like he needed to do it during a moment in time. He really wanted to make sure that he was not in any way responsible for putting those in the hands of anybody who could do harm to someone else. And they've since recalibrated their distribution where they still do have hunting rifles in rural areas where people hunt, but they don't need to have them in downtown areas where people don't. And that was a pretty gutsy call at the time. CVS has done, many times are mentioned throughout the book, but things like they took all the cigarettes out of their store. They stopped selling cigarettes many years ago. Again, took $1 billion hit on that, if not more. Got a lot of, took this sort of big sales dump at the beginning and then watched it come back up. And when you actually see also is in the geographies where they have stores, the incidence of smoking has gone down. So just being accessible, drove the behavior, making it less accessible, helped thwart the behavior. So they realized that they had a really big impact. And they continue to do things like that. They have another initiative now where they are no longer retouching the beauty photos in their store, because they recognize, again, that contributes to the insecurity that young girls have and all these other conditions that are sort of systemic from that. And they're encouraging all of their beauty partners to do the same. And if they don't, they'll watermark the photo in the store and say this has been retouched. So they're really incentivizing and, again, pushing that behavior. And you can imagine, again, that their beauty partners are not super excited about that. Sort of the same as Walmart tried to do with sustainability and pushing their product partners to have much more sustainable packaging. You recognize you're in this unique position to create and contribute something quite extraordinary from the platform that you have, and it makes a big difference. And again, we're thinking about this through the bigger lens. The reason all this matters is because we are not only thinking about this in this moment in time, but in continuing to have, I would say not pressures, I would say provocations or challenges as we think about the Sustainable Development Goals that the UN has put forth. It's about a 5-year initiative at this point, it's still very new. And it's really fascinating to see how people's understanding of the SDGs is starting to increase. There's 17 different areas in which they're encouraging organizations and leaders to take a concerted action against or for, I would argue. And you're starting to see it show up like on Unilever's website. They actually have, when they talk about palm oil and that they're trying to get to a place of sustainable palm oil as opposed to going into the rainforest and extracting it in pretty awful ways. And they talk about the actual goals that they're addressing. I can't remember the numbers of them, but they actually have them listed with little icons from the SDGs at the top of their webpage. And I'm starting to see that more in corporate reporting and in corporate sharing, is that they're actually committing themselves to a specific set of SDGs, which I think is a great goal, a great global benchmark for us to be heading to. The next reason to be doing this is because there is increasing momentum to move beyond GDP as a global production metric or a success metric. We're realizing it is just a really, really limited metric, and only, it was designed in the 20th century to measure a very specific portion of the industry, which was production and consumption, and it left out a whole bunch of other metrics around well-being. And when we cheer for GDP to go up, we're cheering for things like increased healthcare costs to go up, or cigarette sales to go up, or environmental cleanup to go up, or incarceration rates to go up, all the things that are measured in GDP as additional consumption, but it doesn't actually measure things that are healthier, like anything that is regenerative or circular or reused, or things that are done from a volunteer perspective, or investing our time in ways that aren't paid. So we're realizing we're cheering on often the things that are not helpful, and we're not celebrating and making visible the things that actually are. So we're actually working on an initiative with Rianne Eisler, who you will meet tomorrow, around a potential alternative to GDP called the Social Wealth Index that has just a much more robust way of looking at how we are holding each other on this planet and making, again, and making good choices and stewarding our resources as effectively as possible. And if you need any more motivation, I will tell you the generation that is following millennials, Gen Z or Gen Alpha or whatever you want to call them, are really mobilizing and calling us to task. If you, the number, Alexis will give us a different number tomorrow, but in our research, we found that 42% of the population is under 25 around the world right now. 42%. I think Alexis has it closer to 50, but it's still a giant number. And that group of folks are really worried about climate stability and climate change. They're worried about ecological health and well-being. They're really pushing back against what they consider to be, stockholder capitalism, investor capitalism, traditional, what they see as capitalism. And they're going to be making very different choices and asking us to show up in very different ways. So that becomes part of the thrust or the inspiration to go take it in these directions. So I think that the part where we often get stuck is, how do we build this, right? Maybe we can create our purpose individually or organizationally. We can get excited about what is possible, but we still don't know how to fully orient ourselves there. So with that, I will turn it over to Ida Hult. She recently left as Global Insights Lead for Inter IKEA. She is very passionate about matching, again, anthropology with insight, with action, and thinks about this, again, from a very large and very systemic perspective. And I think, is she in Sweden? I think she might be in Sweden. And so we're realizing is so much of where the epicenter of this thinking is. So many of the innovations around us are coming from that small little country. So we will listen to Ida now.
How can I help folks see the things that I see and meet the people that I get to meet and see the case studies that both inspire or infuriate me, and recognize we have so much potential to move ahead, and we are in this really extraordinary moment where we get to do that.
IKEA is super value-based. I think everyone joins IKEA for the great vision. I mean, to get a better life for the many people. I mean, that is the vision that that brings in good-hearted people. And I mean, they were tolerant enough to, they were able to tolerate me just messing around. And really trying to turn every stone and figure stuff out. And I mean, that takes a lot of kindness. And I had super good management. I mean, IKEA is a movement much more than a company. I mean, it really is. It sounds so cheesy, but...
No, I'm totally with you. So let's talk about that for a moment to the extent that you can. Like, what are you most proud of that has transpired since you were at IKEA? That we know about?
Yes, that's the case, right? I'm very proud of the fact that it has such a expansion of ambition. IKEA is willing to take on big challenges. And I think one of the great things that led to that was the pledge to kind of like open up. I mean, because that's what we need to do. We need to open the windows to our corporate silos and just let reality blow through. And IKEA has a very strong heritage of home visits. And I mean, all of us that are employed at IKEA, we work on store days. We have to work in the stores, so we actually see the real world. And all of us do home visits where we visit people in their homes to figure out not only like functional needs, but also like emotional needs. IKEA did a lot of important work when it comes to what we do, because we want to make a better life for people. We don't want to sell a product. So we have a unified language for what a good product actually is, which we call democratic design, which holds a lot of different dimensions when it comes to function and form, but also to sustainability and price and availability and stuff like that. But most important going forward is that they have stretch goals. I mean, they have big, hairy goals that kind of make me feel very small. And I think that's necessary, because that requires to do more. We have no idea how to solve it. We have no idea how to achieve the things that we want to achieve. And that's the kind of goals that you need to have. But of course, the question now is, will you keep it up with the action? I'm very proud for setting a very bold direction, but now it's also, are we able to walk the talk and keep the whole corporate group together, because IKEA is a brand.
And I do think that when you think about what the future needs and expects, one of the things we talk about is that in the past we thought it was really risky to take a bold move, right? It was always taught to be very incremental so that we don't mess things up. And now I think that that's actually the bigger risk, is if you just take tiny little steps and don't think about it from the biggest, boldest place possible, and or the unique position that IKEA is in, right? There's something about its ability to even envision what is possible and having that imagination.
So we have to figure out what is the boldest, best future for like the 3 billion people we want to reach within the planet, that we kind of want to keep in somewhat good shape. We're not doing a great job now, but we can do better. How are we going to do that? Because I mean, our strategies, they don't look 50 years ahead. But I mean, I just love that founder of IKEA, Ingvar Kamprad, and he said, maybe we should have our sights a little bit further out when we're thinking future. And this is like the common story, and everyone's like, okay, so how far? Like plus 5 years? No. How about 400? And it's like, yeah, well, let's do that then. 400 years out, what would we do? I mean, that's one way of doing future back strategy.
Yeah.
At least like take the really bold vision, but then also have a very pragmatic view on where are we today? Where are we vulnerable? Where are we leaking in terms of course, cash, but I mean all the other currencies that we need to measure. And what could we have? I mean, what we have today, what is the beautiful tomorrow that we could have, and what are those kind of gaps? Bring people to the gap, like really make a dramatic gap and like serve these insights that serve as hope. I mean, for me, I always like hope is an axe. Hope is not a lottery ticket that you hold on to and hope for the best. You take hope as your axe, and then you're like trying to, break down the doors. I spend so much time with my clients to make them, they have to get their butterflies in their stomach to fly in formation. You have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, and you do that by breaking down a vision to steps that you can take tomorrow, because no one really, not even IKEA can go to work and every second think about the better life for the many people. It needs to be something that I can do and push in this meeting and in this meeting and within this product, because otherwise it will fail. As soon as it hit the line, it will fail. If it's just words, if it's just big insight, it needs to be, very, very tangible, and you need to feel it. And
Right.
you need to work on, bravery, being, relentless in your purpose.
But then also the micro actions, the daily micro actions that people take, and the decisions that they make, or I would say micro decisions that we make. Like, I want to be in almost every single meeting going, nope, just a little bit more here. Nope, just a little bit more there, right? Because those actually have huge trajectory impacts. And so
that's exactly it, right? Transformation, that's not like, that's not a destination. It's what you do today. It's a present day activity. That's what you need to do. You need to break it down to that, because that's what you will do today. That's what matters. And I mean,
the reason, again, this book was so important to me is because I felt like it was how people think. Because if they can just change how they think and start to imagine like a different set of priorities, and to your point, the structures that are inside organizations that prevent us from being able to do this work as effectively or as quickly or as boldly as we can are just constructs. These are just decisions that we all made to somehow either feel safe or to feel accepted or to feel successful based on whatever that criteria is. If we shift all that, right, it shifts the ability for us to be able to go do the work that really needs to be done. That is congruent with the 21st century world that we're in. That stuff worked in the past. It helped scale huge organizations like IKEA all over the globe. But I think we have a different mandate now as we move forward.
I mean, there's very few people living under a rock nowadays. Everyone knows this. They know that the world's changing. They have this nagging feeling that we're not on it, and we're navigating in the fog. And what used to be, a little bit of turbulence is now like every day. So it's also a joyful work, because I mean, yes, all companies are struggling with this. Everyone, IKEA is as well, and I mean, all of these great companies that we admire from a distance, they're all doing this, and I just feel this heartfelt energy for like actually being able to talk about this. How are we going to do this? How are we going to bring this along? What do we want to shred? Because we do need, like, the unlearning curve needs to be a little bit more dramatic. I mean,
I know. I think that this is the moment. I think that's the part that is exciting. If I was going to ask you what the most meaningful word is to you, what's the most meaningful word to you?
The word I use most when I work is not yet. To me, not yet is so liberating. It's kind of like the finally, but it's a little bit more pep.
No, I'm with you. Totally.
Like, we're not doing that here. Well, not yet. Or we can't do that, not yet. And I mean, it's something that is like, it's forgiving, but it's also liberating. I use not yet so often.
Differently. When you think about what does inspire you, like what not worries you, but really inspires you. Like, I think there are movements around a distributed web that I find very inspiring to me when I start to imagine. I think this idea about positive degrowth and the conversations around what that could look like in a more regenerative way of being able to share resources and coordinate resources. Like, there are things on the horizon that very few people are spending time thinking about or talking about yet that I find really, really inspiring. Right. And that might fly in the face of corporate structures, or might fly in the face of a current way in which society is organized. And we'll have to sort our way from here to there. But what are the things that inspire you? Like, really?
What inspires me, I would love working alongside technology. I think it's great to get help with the legwork, because to me, the technology that we have now, that we're just like seeing the tiny starts of, for me, it's liberating from, of course, my time, but it's also liberating in the sense that when we work alongside technology and with it, not against it, which seems to be the case sometimes, but when we work with it, we get to be like our best selves, our most human self, because then we can actually focus on being the things that the technology, at least not yet, is not very good at, which is like being, serendipity comes along, being creative, using your imagination, working with ethics, working with creativity. I mean, technology is always an inspiration for me. And also, I can't help but mention the social uprisings regarding several different issues. I find that insanely inspiring. I love when people are raising their voices and also realizing that they have a voice. I mean, for me, a lot of the transformation that we see, yes, it's due to technology. It always brings along changes. But for me, it's a transformation is because we've kind of been hiding a lot of problems under the carpet. And with every uprise, with every social movement, with every like purpose-driven action, I believe that we're changing the world to the better. So that's what's pushing transformation. You can feel fear, or you can feel determination. You can feel fear, or you can feel like that rush of energy because you're having an impact. You're putting yourself out there. I mean, I'm trying to work with their courage. And I'm also very much trying to work on their emotional intelligence. I think it's super important going forward, since that is what our human skills is what we have to offer as a complement to technologies. I think you need to be, emotional fitness, say what you cannot say, think the unthinkable, what you think is not possible yet, the not yet. I love it.
We're all at the same revival meeting together, and we all got the same like song sheet, and we all got to sing the same hymn. When you get to sit in with these people, we hear the same kinds of conversations over and over again, but taken from their unique perspective and from the work it is that they do. So the part that I didn't introduce Ida with is that we know IKEA for having sold really hard to put together but really cute furniture all around the world. Years ago, I went with my family to Japan, and we were looking at Airbnbs, and they all had literally the same furniture and those apartments that we had in our house. I'm like, they are everywhere. But they've also then made huge moves in sustainability. They're committing again to upcycling and recycling, like so many, and circular supply chains like H&M and Apple and other manufacturers are. But I think the two really big, bold moves that people probably there's actually multiple. They bought some land in Georgia recently, which is really interesting to make some forestry land there. But they've also finally made the big decision to discontinue their catalog, which they sent to over 1 billion people around the world, I think. And it's just such an important part of their thing. Emma, my team, has said it's more widely read than the Bible. So you can imagine inside the organization how much discussion there was to let go of something that is printed on paper and has such a huge carbon footprint attached to it, and deciding not to send that out to everyone and being very afraid of what that would do for their business. But at the same time, they're moving into completely different things. They're bringing now that whole idea of used furniture into the store. So they're going to be able to have gently used furniture and spare parts, so you don't have to just get rid of something if you lost a bolt. But also they are now interested in building tiny homes and in affordable communities, and really trying to, again, go to that movement around dignified housing that we see happening with the small homes or 3D printed homes movement. So they want to be part of not just making sure you've got a great couch or a piece of art on your wall, but you actually have a dignified home to live in. So that's the vision that I think is so compelling. But I think what's interesting about what Ida said, and marries with so much of what it is that we talk about throughout the book, and particularly in this chapter, around paradox between those micro actions you do today and the place that it puts you then into the future. I love the fact that IKEA thinks about this 400 years out. Emma and I did a project on where we will be 50 years, and we thought we were being pretty bold in that initiative. So apparently we need to get even more creative and think about where we go to talk to Jim and spend some more time in the sci-fi world about what it is that could be possible. But also the fact that we need to measure things with multiple currencies. I think it's a nice way of being able to frame the fact that there are multiple ways in which we're going to be doing accounting for our actions in the future. And the other thing that I love so much about Ida, when she talks about butterflies, having butterflies in your stomach and turning that into a place of formation and being able to have more courage. That's what she teaches her children, which I think is such a great way of thinking about it. So when you're in that place of discomfort, that turning that into something that is actually a fuel for being able to take the bolder action, knowing that you've got that kind of like thrust and energy that can be harnessed in a different way, I thought was very encouraging. And lastly, on the words "not yet," not yet is a word that I also use in the book. It is not about that you are not in a time horizon. It is about the fact that you have the ability to learn. It opens you up for growth. It goes back to the whole growth mindset versus fixed mindset thinking. And the fact that if I'm able to say, well, we haven't done this yet, it means it opens up the capacity to start doing it now. So I find those to all be very compelling ideas that get us over the hump of being able to imagine that we could have an impact on 1 billion people or more on the planet. And the last thing I'll just close with is, again, this doesn't just stop with corporations and what it is they're doing now around sustainability or around reskilling or around some of the making sure that the technology is used in a responsible way. It actually will fold itself into completely evolving what business looks like, or what corporations look like, or what society looks like in the future. There are several initiatives that are just over the horizon that I'm aware of. I'm sure there's more that I'm not, that have to do with things like basically taking the patterns of nature and imagining how they will completely reshape things like our organizations. So there's a great bunch of work on reimagining organizations and turning them into teal organizations that are very distributed and work in much more small cellular structures. I was on a podcast interview yesterday on being human, and we had this whole conversation about what that looks like and the thinking that's advancing around that. There's a movement to rebuild and restructure a more human internet that completely flips it inside out and allows us to have more agency with our data and our ability to connect with other people without going through centralized organizations, which is holochain. And there's a little description of that in the book, but again, it's very cursory, but it's super exciting to imagine what that could create. And lastly, then again, there's this championing for a whole different social and socio and economic structure that you guys have heard me mention a couple of times, called partnerism, that comes again out of Riane Eisler's work, that again is much more coordinated way or integrated way of thinking about economic vitality and how we build that. And so tomorrow we will close this with what does it mean? Like, what are the things that are in place to allow us to thrive? What are these movements? How do we prepare versus plan? How do we prepare ourselves? How do we prepare our kids? How do we prepare our organizations and our teams and society in general for this big shift that I think that we are heading into, that gives us a tremendous opportunity to live better and happier and safer together. So that is the goal, and that is my mission. So thank you guys for